and welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Duncan Birmingham. He is a writer, TV producer, and a filmmaker who helped create the IFC series Maron, and was a writer on the Starz show Blunt Talk. His debut feature, Who Invited Them, was just released on Shudder. Welcome to the show!
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is a real treat.
Thanks for joining us. We're really excited to chat with you, particularly about your movie. And also, before we do get into kind of like your horror history, I have a question, because I went digging on IMDb, and I saw that you got your start, potentially, for Weekly World News.
I did. I love the Weekly World News. I lived in Florida, and when I was in high school, I wanted to be a writer, and a friend of my neighbors worked at the National Enquirer, and I worked there in the summertime. I described it as like, that was like my Almost Famous, but instead of Rolling Stone, it was the National Enquirer. You know, it's just like the office boy.
That's more interesting to me than the Rolling Stone.
Way more. Well, I did work at Rolling Stone after, and then, yeah, not interesting.
Oh my God.
But on the same work campus, I'll call it, was the Weekly World News offices, which was just like this ragtag bunch of 12 people. Really weird, really out there. And the second summer I worked there, I said, is there any space like Weekly World News? Can I be the office boy there? So I worked there for a couple summers, a little stint after college. So everyone, my college roommate and everyone I went to school with was in the Weekly World News. I would take their picture, send their photos in, and they might pop up like 6 months later as like, a guy that got Princess Diana's liver after she died, or a couple migrant workers who were killed by a citrus monster. I was always in there as some like really weird doctor. So a lot of fun stuff. And there were also, we had so many crazy fans, not crazy fans, but well, some were crazy. We had a lot of eccentric fans that would show up and be in the parking lot, like waiting for the Weekly World News people. There was this guy, Dr. Love, who wore a inflatable tube around his waist, and he had all kinds of cures.
That was a real man? That was a real fan?
He was a real man. I thought you were going to say, was he a real doctor? And I was like, I don't know. I hope not.
No.
I hope not. Could have been. But yeah, so the Weekly World News was, really fun group of people. And I loved it.
That was one of my favorite things about going to the grocery store with my parents when I was a kid, is like grabbing that and seeing where Bat Boy was and all of those kind of like wild ass stories.
They were so good. And I got to say, if you flip through the Weekly World News, at least back then, it was very hard to tell. Obviously, most of the stories are fabricated, but then there was a lot of stuff that would just be like some weird story that came over the Associated Press wire that they put in. So they kind of did a nice job of like mixing up, fact and fiction and then blended stories. But I was there when the creator of Bat Boy was there. Dick Culpa, I think was his name.
Wow.
And he had quite a few fans.
I mean, I saw the musical, Bat Boy, the musical played here in Omaha. It was fabulous. It was fabulous. He's always been a favorite of mine, but but Weekly World News, like, there's a lot of like, cryptids and horror stuff about that. But take us back kind of to the very beginning. How did you get introduced to horror?
I got introduced to horror by being completely terrified and staying away from horror for probably as long as I could. I was a huge scaredy-cat. But I was also a movie buff. So at a certain point, you're like, well, hold it. I've seen all the Kubrick movies, but I haven't seen The Shining yet. I've seen all the Friedkin's big movies, but I haven't seen The Exorcist. So I kind of went into horror probably two ways. One was, or maybe three ways. One was through kind of my favorite filmmakers and seeing their movies. So kind of a lot of the classy horrors, like, Jaws, Exorcist, like I said, and kind of like, grin and bearing it because I was so terrified. Then obviously this is I'm a child of the 80s, so there wasn't no sleepover was complete without either Friday the 13th on VHS or maybe A Nightmare on Elm Street, or possibly something a little grittier like Sleepaway Camp, which really, I still remember riding my bike home from a sleepover, and I was beside myself. So those two ways. And then I'm from Boston. There was a great show, The Movie Loft, with Dana Hershey, that showed so many movies uncut, and they showed a lot of movies of all types, but also some great horrors on there. Just some like great gritty movies that all big time influence to invited them, like Straw Dogs Uncut with Dustin Hoffman was on there. I watched that as a kid, and that was that obviously blew my mind.
God.
Yeah.
Do you remember how old you were when you saw Straw Dogs? Because that's a rough movie.
I think I remember how old I was for our pick today. I don't remember Straw Dogs, how old I was, but I still lived in Boston, so I think I was under 10. Now, a lot of the movies were uncut, like Deer Hunter was uncut. Maybe Straw Dogs was a little cut. I don't know. So through many different roads to horror.
So how did you get into cinema? Was your family like a big movie family, or did you kind of come into loving cinema on your own?
We were movie watchers. No one in my family is like a cinema buff or is in cinema, but certainly watched movies. Lived down the street from a video store. That I remember that was like one of my few, first things I could do as a independent. I wasn't an adult, whatever I was, a tween, going to the video store and renting movies. So, and then later I worked at a video store. Yeah, all my friends in high school and middle school very into movies. So, a little combination. But my parents were moviegoers. That's why it really bums me out. They don't go to the movies anymore because they don't feel like there's anything for them to see. There aren't those like, Richard Gere type sexy thrillers or something. Those like parent type movies.
Yeah.
For them.
My parents feel the same way, but
no sexy Richard Gere thrillers. I know. I'm the same way. I want those movies too. I'm like, or like a good courtroom drama or something.
It's a lot of superhero movies right now.
Yes, there are.
And the same kind of ilk, but okay, so you were a scaredy-cat growing up, you said. Has that continued into adulthood? Do you still get scared watching movies?
More just like life. More life. Now, obviously,
I mean, movies, fair.
Movies, and I love horror movies, but yes, more life is the anxiety, and going to a movie and sitting down and watching something and being scared is more the relief.
Okay.
But I mean, in terms of favorites, I mean, those ones I mentioned, I think of like Jaws, The Exorcist, and The Shining is like my holy trinity, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, maybe my holy quadruple, my holy quinity, as kind of my ultimate favorites. And then just because the movie I made has a certain home invasion element to it. I call it a light home invasion movie. There are certain movies, everything from, like I said, Straw Dogs, not really, more of a dark thriller with Straw Dogs, Funny Games, The Strangers. It's kind of a little bit of not a home invasion movie, but kind of a trapped in a house. The Invitation, obviously, we wear that influence on our sleeve in the movie. Those are some of my favorites as well.
Hell yeah. What is the last time, do you remember the last time you actually felt really scared at a movie as an adult?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I mean, I watched, there are movies that I've had to almost look away. I mean, Possessor with, what do they do to Sean Bean's face? Was that with a fire poker?
The fire poker in the teeth.
Yeah. So that stuff like that. I don't know. I guess I wasn't scared, but I was certainly sitting up for that. Same with Titane, if I think I pronounced that correctly. And with Raw as well. And Saint Maud, that was another one when she puts the the nails in the shoes. As a recovering Catholic, that one really hit home for me a lot. I'm going to see Barbarian tonight, so we will see how terrified I get.
It's so good.
I want to hear what I'll see on Twitter if you tweet about it. But it's so exciting! It's a good time.
Or now I need to know when was the last time you guys got super terrified?
I think the last time that like a movie really like scared me was Host from a couple years ago.
I can see that.
Zoom horror film.
So good. That movie was so good.
It really was. But the movies that pop up in my head immediately are Terrified and Hereditary. Both of those.
Right. Yeah. Hereditary. Hereditary really scared me. I would say that might even Midsommar as well. That might be the last one.
Noroi the Curse is another one that really scared me relatively. It's a Japanese found footage movie from 2005 that I saw relatively recently. And I think that one might be the one that has scared me most recently.
Okay.
Like really scared me.
It's a good one.
I'm like, wait, have I ever seen a movie in my entire life?
I know, and every people on like just instantaneous like response, it's always like, have I ever watched a movie?
Oh yeah, my mind goes blank. I mean, when we first started talking about this show, my mind did go to The Exorcist, and when I caught a little bit of it on like cable TV as a kid, just like a minute of it, I was so scared. My parents came home from dinner. I like confessed that I'd watched a little bit of The Exorcist, and I was like, and I said something like, but it's all made up. It's just a movie. Like I was like teeing them up to reassure me. And my dad's like, no, it's based on a true story. It happened. He's like, and you believe in God, right? So, God's real, the devil's real. And yeah, I did not sleep well that night.
Oh, ouch. That's mean.
So I had a lot of material for Scarred for Life. Yeah,
it sounds like it.
The other one that freaked me out recently, but it's on festival run. It's called Skinamarink.
Oh, I don't know that at all.
It just premiered at Fantasia. It's a movie I watched. It's like very weird liminal space horror.
It's so weird.
It's so weird, but it like reminded me of very specifically weird moments in my childhood, so it like really fucked me up. And there's a part where they're whispering, "Are you asleep?" And I was like getting really sleepy, and I just sat straight up and was like, "Not anymore." So yeah, but that's not out yet. But that's the one to keep on your radar because it's weird. Skinamarink,
right. I mean, with that title, I would hope it's weird. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm adding that to my queue.
But you talked about how you're scared. You're like, you've been scared of horror. But what kind of draws you to the genre as an adult and into kind of work within the genre, or at least genre adjacent?
Sure. I mean, I'm talking about just movies that maybe that there aren't that type of movies that like for my parents to see, but I also feel like we're in such a unique time for cinema going that horror films have kind of been this great saving grace for movies, especially for moviegoers like me, where it's like I want something that I feel like I'm compelled to go to the theater to see. That there's like an immediacy there that I'm not going to wait for it to be on VOD or HBO Max, and I feel like horror's really found a way. Just the vibe of being in the theater, being scared with other people, gets me to the theater, and I love that. And I don't know why, for some reason, comedy. And I'm a big comedy person. Comedy hasn't quite been that successful in that. There aren't these like big comedy movies that are coming out that are thought of as theater only or type flicks. So there's that, and I also feel like I have a dark sense of humor. I work mostly in comedy in TV. And I often get the note that it's just too dark. And when I started writing horror a few years ago, I did not get that note anymore. And that was really great. The darkness was welcomed, and I love that. And I think I mentioned, I grew up fairly religious. And there's just something about, it's in all storytelling, but more so in horror. There's just something about, the sin of the protagonist and how it often boomerangs back on them and paying for your sins that feels, really classic and such a great part of storytelling. I feel like it's more pronounced in horror than any other genre.
Yeah. So you got your start. You were a reporter. You worked for Weekly World News, Rolling Stone, a bunch of these, writing gigs. How did you get interested in TV and producing and filmmaking?
I was always interested in TV and film, just, like most people, just didn't really know how to go about it. I had, luckily, I'd gone to a college in upstate New York where they just started a screenwriting class. Oh. So I took a bunch of those classes, and that was really great. We were just like cramming out screenplays really, really fast, terrible, awful screenplays. And I made a plan to move out to LA and got an internship at a studio out here, and did that for a while, and then did the internship, got very lucky. I was in the right place at the right time for getting being an assistant on a TV show. I was an assistant on a show called Queer as Folk. I think there's a new one. I'm talking about the one from like 20 years ago, but not the British one. The one with Hal Sparks. So that was, the turn of the century. And I had not moved here too long before. I didn't realize what a great gig this was, like what a great stepping stone gig it was. At that time, I didn't even really have a TV, or at least it wasn't plugged into anything. I was just watching a lot of movies. So yeah, Queer as Folk was really great for me. And then did a lot of writing, not for the show, but was able to like carve out some writing time and meet people who could, helped me out to get those first writing gigs.
That's so cool. Where's Folk was such a important television show for me that was the turn of like around 2000, around that time.
I think it was like 2001,
2001.
I mean, it ran forever. I think I was there for the 2 seasons. But it ran many years, and now they got the reboot. I'd love to hear that. That's great.
Yeah, the reboot is really good too, by the way. I really hope it gets a second season.
Is that on Showtime?
No, that was on Peacock.
But yeah, that was a great gig. And then met a agent, and wrote. I got this big break writing a movie for Universal Studios. I thought like I was so smart and like everything was going my way, and like this was going to be, it'd come out the next year with my name on it and be this big hit. And, they paid me for the movie, which was great. And that's how I got my insurance and all these different things. But yeah, movie, as often is the case, the movie did not go into production.
That sucks when that happens. I mean, you got paid, you got like, insurance. That's great, but it sucks that it never got made.
It happens more times than it doesn't. So I don't know why. I just thought it wouldn't happen to me. I was like, no, they're going to read this movie and they're going to be so blown away by it.
So we often, like a lot of directors we talk to have come from a comedy background, but I love hearing about it and how if you see a similarity between comedy and horror, because, we talk a lot about how they are so similar. So I'm curious about your perspective since you've worked in both spheres and kind of how you see the connection between the two.
Yeah, I just think there's something about the comedy I like. There's a lot of, tension in it. And that feels like always that tension and that relief is where the laugh is, those uncomfortable situations that are relatable. Mm-hmm. And that really, to me, feels, very much like horror, or at least in the setup of a good horror film. So yeah, a couple of years ago, I made a short film, and I wanted to be about this, this guy who can't catch a mouse in his house, and his wife is like very upset that like, can't you do anything right? He's like out of a job. Anyway, he hires an exterminator who emasculates him, and also kind of like he's like also kind of scared of her. Anyway, I kept writing these different drafts of it, and as a comedy, it was fun. But then it kind of turned into a little bit of a short horror film. And once I made the decision to get a little blood in there and just go for it, I think it just made it such a more interesting story, and I just loved it. So that was a couple of years ago, and and once you start killing people in your scripts, it's kind of hard to go back.
There you go.
Stakes feel very low otherwise. Yeah.
So speaking about kind of adding blood to it in horror, you have your debut feature is now on Shudder. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about Who Invited Them?
Yeah, Who Invited Them came out of the idea of. I love a good party, especially feels like post-COVID. Parties can be a little fraught for many reasons. Well, not post-COVID, I guess, wherever we are in COVID. But I just love this idea. Like I said, I love home invasion movies. Home invasions are the scariest thing to me because they happen. You can get on all the time. You can get on Nextdoor or, Citizen or whatever your weird app is and find out where the home invasions were, last night, at least in LA. I keep a very worn copy of Helter Skelter on my bedside table just to remind myself to lock my doors at night.
Oh my God.
So home invasions are really terrifying to me. And basically I love the idea of someone having a party, which is, basically you're opening your house to your friends, but there could also be strangers as well. You don't know who's going to come in. So I love this idea of some mysterious people infiltrating a party. And that's kind of our setup to the movie when our main characters realize that this little housewarming party, they do not recognize 2 of the guests.
And even without like not recognizing the guests, your movie had me on edge because I'm an introvert. And the one thing I hate is when a party is over and no one is leaving. It's like, okay, I'm ready for you to go home now.
Oh, yeah.
So even before like there's the idea that, they're not, no one knows who they are. It's just like, this is like my nightmare, and they just want to keep partying. And I'm like, no, I would want to go to bed at this point.
It is the worst. I know I've been both people. Now I'm usually the person who's like, get out. But yeah, a friend of mine watched it and was like, oh, this is like a horror movie about your social anxiety, which it very much is. Parties are, so fraught, such social minefields. that it felt like it was fertile territory for a horror movie.
Yeah, I know that when I go to a party, I almost said when I go to a horror movie. When I go to a party, I will latch onto my friend that I'm with, and I will not leave their side, because it's like I get so anxious around new people I don't know, and so like this whole movie just had me on edge.
Well, I just need my exit plan. I mean, I've literally gone to parties where I've walked in, grabbed a cookie and a quick beer, and like walked out the other side, and then just to my car. I'm just like, nope, not feeling it. Just like literally like 2 minutes, like in the front door, back door, and I'm in my car.
Yep, we went to a wedding this weekend, and we were like, "What's our exit strategy?" It's not that we didn't want to be there. It was just like, I'm tired. I don't want to be out late. But you kind of talked a little bit about the home invasion influences on it, and they have the iconic home invasion movies that we all know about. But were there any like particular films that really stood out in your head that served as kind of influences or kind of guiding lights in a way of what you wanted to accomplish with Who Invited Them?
Sure. I mean, like I said, The Invitation was certainly one. In terms of when I saw that movie, I just I recognized that situation those people were in even before it got culty. And I also thought watching it, I was like, there seems to be a way to do this that's with laughs, and I really liked that idea. So there was The Invitation with laughs was often something we would invoke. There are movies outside the horror range that are just these kind of like all-night knockdown, drag-out family dramas that I really love, that are almost like plays that felt like was a vibe we wanted to replicate. And that's everything from like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf to the Celebration, for sure, is a big one, which is it's not a horror movie, but I don't know of a movie that's more horrific than the Celebration, which I really, really love.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh, you love that one. That's a 90s Dogma movie. Not Lars von Trier, but the other big Dogma guy, about a big family dinner that goes terribly, terribly wrong. Lots of I love rich people behaving badly and being exposed.
It's fucked up. It's really fun. I had to watch it in college in a film class, and I was like, oh, I don't like having to watch this with a large group of people.
Yeah, and then there's just I just love any type of movies where it's couples being infiltrated by some kind of stranger, and so much of the movie is a slow burn of like, what is this person's game, and there's so much politeness going on that has to drop away before you really get into what's going on in the movie. And it's anything from like, I'm thinking of like The Gift to all those great like movies like Single White Female, and oh god, there's a couple of good ones with Kurt Russell from the 90s that I'm forgetting. I like couples love tested by stranger off the beaten path, that some of its own like subgenre. Yeah, and Funny Games certainly was one as well. And then there's a movie I saw on the Criterion Channel, The Honeymoon Killers, that's based on a true story from the late 60s, and that just is it's so terrifying. It's almost like a documentary about this very, very unusual couple of killers.
Ooh.
Oh wow, yeah, wow, okay. I'm adding these to like my watch list. But so the thing that like jumped out at me as well about this, and I can kind of maybe see a little bit of the Haneke maybe reference, is the kind of politeness aspect of it, about like the kind of comedy of politeness, where these two are here and they're like, the husband and the wife obviously want them to go and want them to stop, but then they keep like reeling them in, and it's that idea, that kind of tension between wanting to be a polite host, especially if they're your neighbors, and not wanting to. And I love that kind of awkward comedy of politeness, I guess is what I would describe it as.
Yeah, I like that too, and I mean obviously, and honestly feel like I am that person. I mean, you're all your characters, but certainly Adam is. I've talked to some people and they're like, did Ryan Hansen know you from before? Is he like doing you? And I was like, no, you literally just met me a couple of days before, and it's just the way that character is written, and he's such a great actor that he's just able to pick up on that character's rhythm so quickly. But that kind of like comedy of politeness, and also Adam and Margot, Adam even more so, is kind of wants something out of Tom. Mm-hmm. And Sasha, so I think it's really fun to see characters kind of get put through the ringer a little bit, and it's they're kind of hoisting themselves on their own petard, as they say, in terms of their the hubris of wanting something, and Tom and Sasha kind of put them through the paces for that. So I like that type of societal manners stuff as well. Comedy of menace is another term. I would like to say I made that up.
Yes.
I saw it. It refers to
that.
British hard edge, British I think comedies in the 60s.
I love that.
I love it.
Also, I love Melissa Tang as Margot.
So
she was
great.
so good.
Oh my God.
Her character just had me laughing just at the asides that she would say. Just what a good quartet of a cast. They obviously have to carry the movie, but they all do such a good job. And Timothy, I loved him. I remember seeing him in 13 Reasons Why, I believe he was in. Yeah, just so good.
Yeah, and Melissa is amazing, and her character feels so real, and she had to do so much, so many crazy things in that movie. Her character might have the kind of most kind of the biggest journey in terms of changes, and Timothy Granderos and Perry Matfeld had to come in, and it's a tall order playing these characters that have to be really charming, because Adam and Margot aren't like total wet blankets. They're pretty, they're pretty cool. They're pretty charming. So they have to be charming, but not in a smarmy way, and impress this couple that they literally just met in a way that doesn't feel like forced or icky, or because Adam and Margot's antennas would go up. So they've got to be really cool. It's hard. It's, you can't really direct someone to be like, hey, be cool.
Right.
They kind of have to have some of that element. And a lot of people who watched the movie have asked if the actors knew each other before, and they did not know each other. They were all cast. This was a very as scrappy and indie as can be. And so they came in just a couple days before for the costume fitting and a Zoom read, and we were off to the races, and they just, nailed it. So I feel very, very fortunate.
That's wild, because they all feel like they know each other, like that there's like a shared history there. So
they do.
That's
now.
wild.
They're all on a text chain.
Acting.
I want to be on the text chain too. I'm not. It's more like social stuff, I guess. It's maybe someday I'll get on there.
One day. Well, Duncan, we've talked about your horror history and some of your creative projects, but what movie have you brought with you today for us to discuss?
Ooh, all right. I brought a little movie. You may have heard of it, called Dressed to Kill.
Dressed to Kill. So this Brian De Palma film is about the following. Thank you again ahead of time to IMDb for this very reductive plot synopsis. A mysterious blonde woman kills one of a psychiatrist's patients and then goes after the high-class call girl who witnesses the murder.
I love that IMDb just sort of gives out the first act twist in a sentence as the plot synopsis for this movie. But
it's great.
But it is so much more. It is so much more.
So much more than that.
But take us back to the beginning. Tell us your Scarred for Life story. How old were you? How did you see this? I want to know your horror story with this one.
Just by the house we were living in, I think I was under 10, so maybe I was 9 or 10. Like I said, I was going to the video store renting movies, but in a religious household, I knew what I could get away with. Sure, I could get away with an R. Maybe I could get away with an R if it was a cop movie or something, like A French Connection or something. But it was all about if it was going to be an R with a sexy video box. Forget it. So I had seen Dressed to Kill. I was intrigued. I was also a little scared. The cover is a little scary. It's like that. I don't know if you call it an animation or painting, and you can see someone speaking through the door at the sexy leg that's protruding. Anyway, I don't know who rented it. I don't know if it was my parents or my brothers, but at one point, that and a couple other movies were sitting on top of the TV. The parents were out, and I was like, holy cow, Dressed to Kill is here, and I couldn't have popped that in faster. And I both enjoyed, but was also super terrified by, and there were kind of two sequences that really stood out, and also a little bit confused. The whole rainbow of emotions from watching Dressed to Kill. I stayed away from it for many years. Got back into it when I got more into De Palma. In my later teens. But yeah, it was a heavy one. It was a heavy one to pop in as a kid.
So what were the scenes you mentioned two in particular that kind of jumped out at you and that you remember terrifying you?
So there's an amazing, beautiful sequence of our main character for a while, at least the Angie Dickinson character, going to a museum. She's and meeting this, kind of handsome but like anonymous man who has no lines, and you don't really get a good look at his face, and there's these beautiful shots of her kind of tracking him through the museum, basically a mid-afternoon pickup, and they fall into this cab and they're making out and they're doing the deed, and she's having an orgasm in the cab. They go back to his place.
As you do.
So all of this is blowing my mind already. I mean, just the opening with naked Angie Dickinson with the body double, and I was like, oh boy, this is forbidden on every level for me. So I'm very teed up and very nervous already. Anyway, after this one night stand, she goes to write this the one night stand a little note. She opens a drawer, writes the note, and is about to put the note back in, and she sees a form letter from the City of New York Health Department that this man has a syphilis and gonorrhea.
Yep.
And I mean, maybe I knew what syphilis was at the time. I don't know if I knew what gonorrhea was. Either way, I knew this was not good. So that was scary. I was like, what? And it also kind of fed into the Catholic upbringing. Like, hold it, this woman has sex. Now she's got like she's going to die? Like, what's happening? And then she runs out of the apartment, and then she's in an elevator, and that's when she is attacked with a razor blade by a mysterious person wearing sunglasses and a wig. You don't know if it's a wig. You don't know what's going on. And their face is kind of blurred from her point of view. You don't know if it's a man or a woman or what is happening. And her beautiful white outfit is like all bloodied up, and it's terrifying. It's terrifying. I mean, it was all there. You had the sex, the terrible news, and then you're dead. So that was terrifying, and I won't go on as long, but then there's a sequence towards the end where Michael Caine's character is in an insane asylum, and he, the nurse is, I don't know what, she give him some water or something. He reaches up, strangles her, and chokes her out, chokes her to death. And then the camera tilts up, and you see all the other asylum residents, all the crazies, looking down on him. It's almost this like, I don't know, Roman,
like a Colosseum,
like a Colosseum. Thank you. You're like, hold it. They're all looking down, and they're cheering and jeering, and it's all kind of in a blue tint. That really freaked me out. That was really terrifying. So those definitely stuck with me, and of course I had to keep the fact that I watched Dressed to Kill secret. So not that my dad was going to be reassuring me after that Exorcist story, but
right.
It was my secret shame for a while.
I can't imagine seeing this at that age. I really can't. Like, no. That's because there's a lot going on in this film that I would not have been able to process at that age.
Yeah, I don't remember what I came away with in terms of, I think the scariness and the shame and all that kind of overpowered a more nuanced critique of the movie. I feel like I recognized Michael Caine from some other stuff. Maybe I had seen him in Jaws 3 at that point. I'm not sure, but Michael Caine's so cold in the movie. I actually don't think it's like one of his best performances. He's not really giving you much. And also just the fact that the movie, which is, riffs on very much on Psycho, where Janet Leigh gets, offed in the first third. I don't think I'd seen Psycho at this point, so I wasn't familiar with the homage factor. So the fact that like Angie Dickinson, who I think I kind of knew, like she was on Policewoman, and she's all of a sudden she's like has sex. Do moms have sex in the middle of the afternoon? And then she's dead, and I'm like, now who are we following? A prostitute and this kid. I mean it's a real intense head twister.
Yeah, I was curious about that because like I saw this. We both saw this for the first time. Was it last year? Because we were doing erotic thrillers and we covered this on our little cuts or mini-sode, and so we watched this, and it was the first time I had ever seen it. And I was of course struck by the psychoness of it all, because it definitely has that plot structure where we're following a character, she ends up dying, and then we end up following someone else. And I'm like, it's such a, especially if you have no frame of reference for Psycho. I can imagine this would be like an audacious first act. Do you remember that like really surprising you?
I do remember. I mean, that whole museum sequence with no dialogue, I mean, is so dreamlike and so disturbing. And I remember that being the real standout. It's funny, as I rewatched it years and years later, but the whole middle of the movie was totally, I didn't remember anything from that. It was really, it's the whole Angie Dickinson 40 minutes, and then that really creepy Kane nurse murder towards the end that stood out.
I forgot actually about a lot of the Angie Dickinson stuff for some reason. Like, and I saw this so recently, and for some reason, like, I knew there was like the museum sequence, but I forgot that it's like a good half of the movie where you're following her, and it feels like almost like a melodramatic look into a sad, sexually repressed woman's life and her attempts to find empowerment through sex and like all this stuff. And then it's like, psych! And then it just like absolutely is just like, surprise, actually this is much different. And I love that, because God, the beginning of this movie is one of my favorites, where it's just like this really seductive, sexy, but almost kind of sad moment where she's like washing herself and moaning and looking at her husband, looking at her husband who's standing at the sink. And it's like the beginning of Carrie. Which came first?
Carrie.
Carrie, okay. Like, which is very interesting, because in Carrie, it's like, oh, she's a teenager just getting her period. And here it's like much more sexual, and it's like, look at her entire body and this moaning of longing. And then the guy like comes in behind her, and you're just like, holy shit, wait, what is going on? And then I think it cuts to her having sex with her husband. It's so weird. They're like, is it a dream sequence? Like, what is going on here? And it's just like a wild way to start the movie, and it catches you. It really kind of disarms you and kind of like throws you off kilter, even in like the first couple of minutes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't remember exactly my reaction as a kid to that opening, but I'm sure it was both excited and absolutely out of my gourd, terrified. Because even just watching it last night, I'm like, what? The guy coming up behind her, you're like, oh, so is this? I mean, she's even punished in her fantasies.
Yeah.
In this movie, and then that really disturbing marital sex.
When he pats her on the head.
So dark. Poor Angie Dickinson.
Yeah, she's fantastic in this early first 40-minute-ish sequence. But what I like keyed in on this watch in particular is how she's not really appreciated by any of the men in her household. Like, her son is like, she wants to get her son to go to the museum, and of course if the son had gone with her to the museum, things would have turned out a whole lot different than they did. But he's like too wrapped up in his science and creating the kind of computer binary. What I don't really know what it is. I guess it's a computer.
No, I loved it. It was so it almost felt like a Spielberg movie in some of those moments with Keith Gordon, where he's like the nerd. It gets kind of like Goonish and very light, which I liked. I was not sure what his assignment was.
But she like is having unfulfilling sex with her husband, who, like Mary Beth, you said, pats her on the head as he like rolls off and goes to take a shower. Her son is like ignoring her and wants to just work on his computer stuff. And so it's this woman in this household where she's really not appreciated. And we kind of follow that sort of repression, because she talks to the psychiatrist, Michael Caine, played by Michael Caine. And, he's like, well, have you told them, that you're unhappy with them? And she's like, no, because I think there's like that kind of interesting interplay of like what she thinks she's supposed to do and how she thinks life is supposed to be, as opposed to like what it could be and what it should be for her. And so there's that, I found it so interesting to watch like this woman trying to finally discover herself and discover, maybe what she's looking for, and then of course gets cut short.
Right. No, you really feel for her. I know she's like getting her groove on, and cut short. Nobody gets not a lot of pleasure goes unpunished in this movie, for sure.
Yeah, I was talking to Terry about that, and we'll probably talk more about it, but I was like, Brian De Palma and his treatment of female characters. Interesting. Because, I mean, I like Brian De Palma a lot. It's just, like, in this movie, it's very fascinating, like, gender politics for a lot of reasons, and again, we'll get into that later, especially Michael Caine's character, but the gender politics here are fascinating with this, like, changing of perspectives of women and how this Angie Dickinson's character at the beginning is treated, and how that transition, like, it's how she did transitions to Liz's character, and I'm just so fascinated with how he treats female characters, especially in this film in particular.
I really love the De Palma documentary. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's really good. Maybe it came out 5 years ago, and Noah Baumbach co-directed it. But there's a whole sequence in it about how in this movie the Keith Gordon character is very much a Brian De Palma avatar, because Brian De Palma had some experience as a kid where he was spying on his dad. His dad was having an affair, so he knew about that. So all this stuff about Keith Gordon spying with the gadgets, there's a lot of real life in that, which I thought was really interesting. And then he had to deal with the guilt of knowing about the affair, I think, and there was a lot there. So there's a lot going on with Brian.
Wow.
I mean, I always think of this Blowout and oh God, Body Double is kind of like a trilogy a little bit. I think probably Blowout's my favorite, and it's funny, this movie and Body Double both have, you know, kind of some bigger cultural issues. But all three really, really amazing movies.
Well, I do think with the aspect of gender and sexuality in this, I do think it kind of complicates things a bit when we switch to Liz, because unlike Kate, Liz is a lot more sexually adventurous. You know, she is a sex worker who also is doing stock sales. And there's a really great scene where she is like on the phone trying to set up like, an appointment as a sex worker. And then she's also trying to, buy stock. And so she's like going back and forth trying to figure out how much money she needs. And so how much, so like she's a lot more interesting and a lot more, I think this movie kind of deals a little bit with repression, a lot with repression, and she is not. And so while she's looked down upon by like the cops, and there's that kind of, push and pull with her career field, as well as kind of the male perspective of that, I think that the fact that she is a successful businesswoman kind of complicates the look of gender in this in a way. Yeah,
I take back what I said about all forms of pleasure in the movie are punished, because that's not really true with her. Yeah, she's so winning in this movie. Is that I wanted to say Karen Allen for a second, but I'll remember the actress's name. And
Nancy Allen.
Nancy Allen. Yes.
She's so good.
I just watched Cruising the other day, so I was thinking, and I think that's De Palma's girlfriend at the time, or maybe wife.
Was it?
Yes,
that makes a lot of sense.
She's been in a number of his movies, I know.
Yeah, she's really good. I mean, I guess she is punished in the end. She's got that terrible nightmare, but she is out there living her best life.
Well, sorry, my cat is trying to get out. Well, have either of you seen John Gilman? That 3-hour-long Chantal Ackerman movie?
Oh, I have not.
Oh, so it's a really incredible, it's like 3.5 hours long, and it's about a woman who is dealing with repression, and the first half of this movie very much reminds me of that, but with more more explicit sex and violence, because it's very much about a woman who's trying to live out her daily life, and it culminates in something happens at the end after like these 3 hours of her being treated like shit by all the men in her life, and then something snaps. So this reminds me of it in that she is very much trying to live her kind of daily life. And I want to go back to the museum sequence, because that is like my favorite part of this entire movie.
It's so good.
It's so beautifully shot. It's, like you said, Duncan, no dialogue. And there's this emphasis on the sound of shoes hitting the floor. Like there's a score underneath of it, but the sound design is having you focus so closely on the sound of feet, and her feet versus his, and who's walking in front of who, and kind of like what's going on with is it a cat and mouse game, this chase, and it's just the way it's cut and shot. It's like a chase sequence almost, but then it culminates. Not how do you expect in like this moment of her finally achieving sexual pleasure in the back of a taxi cab. And it's just it's so thrilling in a way that I never would have thought, and also like kind of subverts expectations on how it ends. And I just absolutely love how he films and like the way he's cutting, like intercutting between her looking at people like and kids and a couple looking at art to her writing in her planner, like very basic stuff, and it escalates to this like this really stressful, tense moment that only her and this guy are privy to. Like everyone around her doesn't really know what's going on. So there's something really fascinating about that tension and the relationships going on here, even though they're very like tenuous. I just think it's so cool.
It's so good. It's like a movie within a movie. I mean, just the little moments of like when she has to have flashbacks to like 30 seconds before, where she's like, hold it, he touched me with the glove. Where's my glove? And you see the glove and you're like, oh, wow. Yeah, I guess there's really no way to get that across in an expression. And it just kind of works because then they do it 3 times it's really, it really is a masterclass. I love it. And I really love the whole subway, too. I'd forgotten that there's that great subway moment in Chase.
Yeah. So before we do move on, I just wanted to say, Mary Beth, when you were talking about how there's like it almost like a chase sequence in my notes for this watch, I was like, this feels like a mini slasher film, except you're not quite sure. Yeah. Is it supposed to be titillating? Is it supposed to be like, is there implied violence here? Is because you're waiting, especially if you've never seen this movie before, you're waiting for some like, killer moment. And so I was like, is this the killer? When I first saw this for the first time, I was like, okay, so what is going on here? And it's like a 10-minute sequence. And it's something that I don't think you would actually see in movies today. I don't think anyone would ever do this, but it's such a brilliant moment that I think is probably the most standout moment of this film. And it's just, it's so simple in like execution and yet, or like in premise, but the execution of it is just so, it's so thrilling. It's so thrilling to watch.
Yeah, there's so much going on and it's very, very tense. I mean, even having seen the movie before, when I was watching it last night, I was like, oh my God, I'm like on the edge of my seat for what is this, character that I just met and like, and a museum like Dalian's kind of like romance pickup, but you don't know what's going to happen. There's something I found something very threatening about the guy she's chasing after, the way he's shot and with his glasses, and he's you can't read his expression. He's so like purposefully expressionless. That I feel like that's part of it too. You feel like this guy could snap at any second, or could be pulling her in the taxi cab to strangle her.
Right. Well, and I also love that this allows De Palma to do the things that he loves to do with split diopters. We get some split diopters in this sequence, and we get split screens, we get all that kind of stuff, and it's just like it's like such a technically beautiful sequence that you're absolutely right. And I was thinking about this in when I was rewatching this, where like there's the sequence where she looks back at him and he's not paying attention to her, and then like he's looking and then she looks back and he's gone, and it's like this moment of like, oh, where did he go? And this moment of, again, it's like sex and violence. There's that kind of thin line there where you're not quite sure how this is going to end. And then there's the environmental storytelling, because I love when she drops the glove and the camera swoops down and focuses on the glove, and then later on he picks up the glove and he's grabbing her shoulder with the glove, and so there's like all these little tiny details that convey so much without saying a single word. And it's just, I don't know, it's my favorite part of the movie.
Yeah, no, me too. And just the element where he puts his hand on her shoulder with the glove, and how she misconstrues that as something potentially dangerous, but of course it could be dangerous. It's right. They keep having their little cat and mouse games, just these little cues that they're sending back and forth that get misconstrued, and what a dance it is, and how like you said, like the sex and violence of the whole operation is so like different sides of the same coin. Like one wrong move in this pickup and she could end up dead, which she does, but in a way that we never would have anticipated from what was starting in the museum. Yeah, when he sat down.
I also think it's so audacious that they're having sex in the backseat of a cab. Like, does this really happen in real life?
It was another time, 1980.
And that taxi driver was getting into it too. He was watching. He was just vibing, I guess.
Oh yeah, he remembers everything to tell the cop later.
He sure does.
Oh yeah, let me sit down, and I'm sure that cop. I love Dennis Franz's wardrobe in this movie. Just like he looks like he's going to a disco, but he's a cop. It's so great. He's so sleazy.
He's so sleazy. But okay, then you also talked about the other actual kind of chase sequence in the subway, and that is constructed again kind of similar, and where there's that one sequence where she's being chased by the punks on the side, and she gets a cop, and they look one direction, and we get to see the reverse where the killer hops on the train. So we missed that. So she misses that. And then they look the other way. And that's, of course, when the punks get on the train. And so we have that kind of inversion of people missing the little tells, just like in the museum sequence where, they keep missing each other and missing intention, where she and the cop keep missing that these threatening forces are getting on the train on opposite ends, and she's stuck in the middle. And it's such, again, split diopters, and we get all that kind of fun stuff. It's such a exquisitely shot sequence.
It's so great that when she's in the subway and she's looking at the subway car and she's looking at the cop, are you going to protect me? And he's kind of giving her the cynical look. And then the camera does, I guess it would be like, it's almost like this 360 pan, around the car. And that's when you see Michael Caine in the window, but the lights are going off on and off in the subway car. I mean, there's nothing scarier to me than 1970s New York subways. I mean, nothing good happens there.
No.
And I also, we talked a little bit about like the split screen aspect, and I wanted to talk about a moment that I really was kind of both creepy and also introduces an aspect of the film. I think the aspect of the film that we need to talk about in terms of like the transness representation. So thinking about the moment, you talked about this, Terry, where Liz is on the phone doing her stock portfolio, and then it's a split screen, and then Michael Caine's character is listening to a voicemail from from a patient who is saying that he is a woman in a man's body, and that he's basically very angry that his psychiatrist would not give him medical sign off to receive surgery to transition. And so this person is now leaving rather unhinged voicemails about how they killed a woman and they used his razor to get him in trouble. And so Michael Caine's listening to this rather unhinged voicemail, which is talking underneath Liz talking, and it's got this almost Black Christmas vibe a little bit to it, but that kind of sinister voicemail phone call. And then we go to transitioning to the two of them watching a talk show with Nancy Hunt, who is a transgender woman, and she is talking on television about being trans. And they're both watching her talk on in different parts of New York City. But it's such an interesting, obviously, introduction into not the introduction, but kind of moving even more into this aspect of trans identity. And this film obviously does not handle trans identity well at all, which we will talk about. But it's so interesting how in this split screen moment, they have the two of them watching it, and it really does make us feel like a spectacle. Like the spectacle of rejecting heteronormativity, especially in the 80s. And this person who is fascinating, oh my god, a man transitioned to a woman, I don't understand. And they're interrogating her about her sexual past and her marriages, and she's very joyful and responding, but it gets this kind of making a spectacle out of someone who is not cis. And again, back then it was taken as a spectacle because people didn't really know much about trans identity. And it's just a very interesting way to kind of really start introducing even further these concepts that this movie is playing with, even if it's incredibly harmful in how it is handling these subjects.
Yeah. So the Nancy Hunt, also an interesting person, real life person. And that was that I believe that talk show was the Donahue show that they were watching. When Nancy worked for Nancy served in the U.S. Army and was during World War II, was in the Air Force during the Korean War, worked for Chicago Daily News, joined the Tribune, was a wartime reporter covering Vietnam War as a combat correspondent, and then transitioned to Nancy Hunt. She wrote a book. What was it called? Mirror Image, which was a detailed account of the sex change operation that she went through. And so there's that aspect of it that I think is such an interesting little segment in this movie where there is like, I don't know, I feel like there is at least an attempt from a 1980s perspective in trying to understand trans identity, but it's not handled very well at all in the rest of the movie. But that segment I thought was really interesting. And I loved that Nancy says, what was the quote? "I've always been a devout heterosexual." And I love that moment is in this movie, because it's just, I don't know, it feels real. And it's surprising back in 1980s that we had someone being able to talk about that, even if it was on something, I don't really know Donahue's show. I think it was sort of like was it sort of like tabloidish sort of, but I don't really know exactly.
It was kind of like the first one, pretty groundbreaking. I think it was a step up, and then the copycat shows after that were a little more tabloidy, but it definitely pushed buttons. I feel like he tried to be fair and balanced in a non-Fox News way.
Yeah, right.
Fox News has ruined that phrase for everyone. So.
They sure have.
No, I thought that was a really interesting part of the movie too, and obviously since the show is scarred for life, there was all this was kind of lost on me in the childhood viewing. I don't know, it almost seems kind of baked in to the premise of this movie that it's just not going to be a fair trans depiction, and I feel like it's a hard one. It's a hard one. I feel like that's why the Michael Caine character doesn't really feel, when I said it's not good performance, because it's not really, it's an idea. It's not a real character that he's playing. And I did read about that, at the time, even though this is 1980, there were, this was met with a lot of controversy, a lot of protests. Same with, for different reasons, but same with Body Double a couple of years later.
Yeah. So there are, because it's hard to talk about a movie that deals with trans identity when we're all, cis people. But I did find a couple of writings that kind of tackle it in different ways. And listeners, we're going to include links to these in the show notes. But there's one that really jumped out to me was posted on the Crooked Marquee by Jessica Kretz, who is a trans woman. And she says that she's always struggled with this film, but she says that over the years, a different portrait of the trans killer Bobby began to emerge. Each new viewing led me to believe there's more empathy towards her than other critical readings have suggested. And so she kind of digs into, back in the 1960s and 70s, it was harder for trans people to be able to transition in America. There was the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association, and they were talking about how clinicians use the term transsexual, and they were thought to be a person with a characteristic path of atypical gender identity. And they go through the different ways that they have to be medically seen in order for them to even request gender
affirmation surgery.
Yes. And so this article kind of digs into that, and about how, like, there's like a whole lot of pressure in order to be able to even transition. And it's a real interesting article, and we'll include in the show notes. But so that's from a trans writer that kind of has like a more positive spin on this. But there's a lot of writings about this. And there's one in particular that I really liked, where, well, there's two. One from Alice Stower, a trans woman film critic, who says that Elliot's pathology bears minimal resemblance to the experiences of an actual trans woman. Instead, it reads as a conflation of trans identity with a dissociative identity disorder. At its most hostile, Dress to Kill suggests that trans women are dangerous, unstable, and confused. And she says that whereas in Carrie, De Palma found truth by telling the monster story, here the monster is incomprehensible and alien. This strikes me as damaging. And so there's that aspect of it. And then someone else was talking about how the problem is that when they hear someone is trans, they have a list of characters that are lumped into this general category of women, in quotations, women who are really men. And that category is filled with psychopaths and serial killers. So I think that there's like, it's really hard for people to really kind of appreciate this movie for a fantastic movie that it is, when there's that kind of damaging trans trope that we see in Sleepaway Camp that was released around the same time. And then also, Psycho beforehand, and then a decade later with Silence of the Lambs. So there's like, there's that aspect of it that kind of complicates this movie in unfortunate ways.
Yeah, and this movie, paying homage, as I said, like kind of baked into the premise, paying homage to Psycho, a movie that has its own problematic in its own way.
It's interesting that it's like, because we have the Nancy Hutt inclusion, and then there's like the part at the end where they're talking rather loudly at like a restaurant about gender affirmation surgery and the idea of being trans, and it's like, it almost feels like maybe De Palma thinks he's doing something that's like more progressive when it's obviously very harmful, because, this enters the canon of Psycho, of Silence of the Lambs, where, like that writer said, there really is such a small pool of trans characters who aren't like dissociative identity disorder, and like making trans this like a mental illness rather than like something like trans is a mental illness that needs to be cured or like that makes you violent, versus it being like the exact opposite of someone just being born in the wrong body, basically. And so it's like he was like grappling with understanding, but still wanted to make a villain out of it. And it's very interesting in watching it and knowing how problematic it is, but like seeing somehow maybe he thought he was like parsing through feelings about trans identity in the 1980s. And this is not excusing or anything. It just is interesting to see how he's using these kind of pre-existing harmful tropes to work through something in the 1980s setting.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there is a push and pull there. Certainly, the inclusion of the Donahue clip feels like he's trying to put something into a context, not in a way that's working. Yeah, I wonder if it feels like there would maybe an opportunity. I'm just trying to think about how could you do this? Is there any way to even do this movie? I wonder if there's something with the therapist that Michael Caine goes to see. There might have been some opportunity with that character to kind of put a lot of this language into that character's mouth and have him put things in some context. I'm not sure.
It is interesting though that we do get a movie, because again I feel that, and I agree. I do think that De Palma is attempting to understand in a way that probably was very difficult to understand in the 1980s, where we didn't really have the language that we have today, and we don't have as much of a progressive society in some ways that we did in the 80s. But because the sequence, Mary Beth, that you're talking about at the very end surprised me that it was actually included in here, because again, it's these characters trying to understand trans identity in a way that it felt weird seeing it in this kind of movie, because it's not something you would again see in Psycho or something you would see in all these other films. It's an actual sequence where people are having a candid conversation about it. And it's a little bit kind of played for laugh, unfortunately. I even though I do think it's funny that the tables around them, the old lady is just like, grabbing her necklace, and it's like, ooh, there's that kind of aspect of it. But it's a frank conversation that every time I watch this movie, I'm surprised that when it comes up, because it feels, I don't know, it feels out of place, I guess, in the movie in a way, but it's also kind of, again, maybe trying to grapple with this identity. So I don't know. It's once we start to dig into that kind of aspect of it, it gets a little icky for me, but.
Well, and De Palma himself, too, I feel like is a little bit of a provocateur, too. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like he does kind of like to push buttons a little bit. So it's like, and that, again, not an excuse for this, but it's almost like he was like, all right, let's do some controversy. Let's do something that's going to make the people talk. And like, let's look at something that's not looked at in cinema quite a bit. And that's kind of how I see De Palma a little bit, as a little bit of a provocative filmmaker. And maybe that was also like one of his motivations here was like, ooh, like titillating and weird and handling this subject. So I'm always curious about like what do you try to like, what are you accomplishing? Like, what do you think you're accomplishing with something like this and having this kind of representation?
I do think that maybe he was more focused on the idea of repression, because here we have, the first character we're introduced to is a sexually repressed woman that is in you kind of get the feeling that it's an unloving relationship. Mm-hmm. And so we have that. And then we also have her foil, the doctor, who is, society is repressing her actuality. And so I do wonder if that might be the kind of theme that maybe that De Palma's trying to explore between these two ideas of repression, because then we also have in this triangle, we have Liz, who is not repressed. She has an active sex life. She works in she's a sex worker, and she, is working the stock market. So I think that when you have these 3 points, I do think reductively and definitely misbegotten, but I do think that might be kind of what De Palma is trying to explore here.
I would agree with that. Yeah, and it does feel like Liz is the all the signifiers that he's pointing at her. She's like our hero, certainly the person who feels like they have life figured out comparatively to everybody else. I mean, even the Keith Gordon character, that the kid seems pretty kind of miserable.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think it's like a combination of that, and maybe he had this premise that. To kind of do a homage updating of Psycho and just couldn't let it go, and maybe thought he was updating in a way that felt fresh, but maybe is not.
Right.
Or is not. Yeah.
Right. So I'm curious, because you said you're a fan of De Palma, correct?
I am, and I highly recommend that De Palma doc from 5 years ago, because I always liked De Palma, but and I saw it on the big screen too, so it was so great to see so many images from movies like this, Dressed to Kill or Blowout, up on a big screen. Where I was like, oh wow, I want to see all of De Palma's movies on a big screen. Then there were a bunch of movies I forgot he had even done, a bunch I hadn't seen. He's really interesting. You have, like I said, that these Blowout and Dressed to Kill and Body Double kind of feel like this kind of weird trilogy to me. I love, but I mean that the same guy did The Untouchables and Mission Impossible, and a movie like Casualties of War, which was like kind of his passion project that he really had to fight for to get made for years, and that's a very dark, painful story. Yeah. He's a really interesting director.
Because the reason why I'm asking is that De Palma's sort of a blind spot for me. I've seen Carrie, I've seen Dressed to Kill, Untouchables, Mission Impossible, and I believe those are the only ones I've seen. So what movies of his do you really recommend? Is it Blowout and Body Double?
I think so. I think Blowout to me is the best of his kind of De Palma-y movies, where he's all his kind of kinks and wild camera work and phobias and conspiracy theories all come to play. I think it's really successful. Really successful movie.
I take it back. I've also seen Phantom of the Paradise. I forgot he did that.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
I forgot he did that one too.
It's such a good movie.
I mean, I could have done Scarred for Life on that too. I mean, that is so intense.
Oh,
I mean, his whole filmography.
So fucking good. His filmography is incredible. Like we're just talking about it right now. It is wild. Like the range of this man and the things he has made. The Godfather. I mean, like this. Not The Godfather. Jesus, Scarface. Sorry.
Scarface is unbelievable. It's so good.
I get them all mixed up sometimes.
I haven't seen like I know. Yeah, I haven't seen like the last 5 De Palma movies. I know some people really love Femme Fatale. I tried to get into it. I'm going to try it again. But yeah, he swings for the fences. He swings for the fences.
He does.
I remember seeing Bonfire of the Vanities with my dad as a kid. That is not a great film. There's a really interesting book, The Devil's Candy, and then they did a podcast version of it about the basically the behind the scenes making of the Bonfire of the Vanities, and how a movie based on such a juicy best-selling book could go so wrong.
Yeah, I've heard of the Bonfire of Vanities, but never seen it. What a cast, though. Tom Hanks, Bruce Willis, Melanie Griffith.
He also has a movie. I don't know if comedy is quite his thing. He has a movie I've been intrigued by for a while, though I just have not brought myself to check it out. Danny DeVito and Joe Piscopo and Wise Guys. It's a comedy from the mid-'80s.
Oh, I have not seen that.
Yeah, I remember.
I haven't heard great things, but I think I want to watch it anyway.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one either.
So before we wrap up, do we want to just briefly touch on our ending sequence here and our like final reveal of Michael Caine and this kind of climactic, wild moment that blows my mind whenever I watch it?
Yeah, I mean, there aren't a lot of movies to me that can pull off a dream at the end. It usually you're like, oh, come on. But this one, it's just so ambitious. It's so long. It works so well. It also, I think, speaks to her, trauma that she's experienced, and that, we really like her character a lot. But she's been through a lot, so it's not going to be an easy process for her to get back to normal. So I feel like in that way it's earned. But yeah, like I said, that sequence in the mental hospital, it's just surreal enough where later you're like, oh, how did I not know that was a dream?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But when you're watching, I don't think you would ever suspect it. And then like the movie starts with Angie Dickinson in this interesting shower sequence. Now you have this kind of bookend shower sequence. That is shot from another this very disorienting, like, high angle.
Yes.
And just that whole steamy shower sequence, and Michael Caine's nurse shoes peeking out of
leaving
the corner
the
of the doorway.
nurse shoes there.
Oh.
It surprised me. I'm glad you mentioned that looking back on it, the mental institution sequence seems a little surreal. But even on this rewatch, because again, this is only the second time I've seen this, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. She comes back and tries to kill her, and I was like, oh wait, no, that was just a dream. It's staged so perfectly well at that sequence that you can't even get mad at that. It's a very extended dream.
Yeah.
Gotcha moment.
Yeah, I mean, it feels satisfying for the movie. Mm-hmm. It's not like Cain has been caught and things are wrapping up, and it's almost like, oh, and now we get this whole extra, probably the third most terrifying sequence in the movie. I feel like it works really well.
Yeah. Okay, so do we want to wrap up and give this our rating out of 5?
Sounds good to me.
Hell yeah. All right, Terry. How many museum chases out of 5 do you give Dress to Kill?
This is one of those things where I'm both like in love with this movie and a little bit repulsed by some aspects of it. It's really hard for me not to give this really high marks because it is a technically beautiful film. I think that this movie, for tackling the subject matter, very B-movie kind of feel to it, very drive-in kind of feel to, like the lascivious storyline, but it's filmed so perfectly. It's acted incredibly well from I'll say the female characters. Again, like we said, Michael Caine's performance is very stilted and probably not his best, but I gotta give this honestly 4.5 museum chases out of 5 because I do think it is a perfect distillation of this movie. I have to say that from the trans perspective, it makes me feel icky, but it also is kind of a masterpiece of a film in my opinion. So it's very hard for me to really kind of rate this one personally, but I think technically 4.5 out of 5. It's a fantastic film. What about you, Mary Beth?
So I'm gonna go with a 4. I think I do really love this movie. I think it is incredible. It's beautiful. It's just impeccably shot. But again, like the issues, like it doesn't age well. The issues with it knock it down a star for me. But I still really appreciate it for what it is and like what he accomplishes from a technical perspective. And I mean, like that first 40 minutes is just like an absolutely gorgeous study about intimacy and repression. And I think Angie Dickinson and Nancy Allen are turning out some like iconic performances here. And it's just such a joy to watch a director having fun with split diopter and split screens and playing with form the way that he does. It's just it's a treat to watch that happen on screen and be able to watch it and have this exist in the world for all of its issues. But Duncan, you have the final word. How many museum chases out of 5 do you give Dress to Kill?
This is so much pressure. Also, I hope that wasn't too disruptive with my dog just coughing.
I thought that was a human.
I know he's got chronic bronchitis, so he's usually pretty quiet.
Puppy.
Is he a squishy face dog?
No, he's all over my Instagram.
I'll look.
Well, no, we're on a podcast. I guess I should.
I'll look him.
He's super cute. He's a little mutt. He's like a teddy bear. I'm going to give this four museum chases out of 5. Obviously the big, I feel like what keeps it out of the top tier Brian De Palma classic canon is the problematic trans representation. When I've talked about this movie with other people, and I think if that feels like something you don't want to dig into when popping in a movie on a Tuesday night, I think Blowout is a better one for you, and a better film. I feel like that on all aspects. But yes, the technical aspects of this movie, the two strong female performances, just some amazing sequences. Also, for me, obviously, this is I have to rewatch it every couple of years just as a balm to get over the scarred for life trauma that I experienced and proved myself. I'm an adult now. So for all those reasons, really enjoy this movie. Maybe there's a couple little moments of there's some stilted dialogue in there for sure, but I feel like that's kind of a De Palma staple too, to a certain extent. So I was really excited to have an opportunity, or just have an excuse to rewatch this movie, and super excited to come on. You guys did you both did such a good job leading the discussion, especially when it came to the Kane character and kind of all the problematic aspects that are part of this movie and part of the history of this movie.
Well, thank you so much for bringing this movie to us so we could rewatch it. Because like I said, it's only the second time I've ever seen it. I love it. I do love it. Yeah. But where can our listeners find you, and what do you have that you can plug or talk about?
Oh, don't get me started. Don't get me plugging. I'll keep it short. Right now, it's the big plug. It's the big plug. But I'm on Twitter too much. Duncan Birm. So basically my name and the first syllable, Duncan, Duncan, and then BIRM. So that's where you can find me at all hours of the night. And the movie Who Invited Them, which I should say for your listeners, if they're fans, if you love Party Down, Veronica Mars, that means you might love Ryan Hansen, who's in it, who's awesome. As you said, Timothy Granadaros from 13 Reasons Why, an untitled horror movie. Melissa Tang, who's so awesome from The Kaminsky Method, and Perry Matfield, who's the star of In the Dark. We have a wonderful bigger cast, but those were our four leads. They were like the four legs of a very strong table, I think, and I think they knocked it out of the park. So the movie's on Shudder, and it's also on AMC Plus. I didn't even know I had AMC Plus, but when I went to Amazon Prime, there's the movie, and that's where my parents watch it too. So a lot of people, I think, have AMC Plus. Those are the two big things. If you like the movie, tweet at me, or I don't know, leave it a review somewhere. And if not, don't feel like you have to let me know that you hated it.
Yeah, don't do that shit.
Most people don't. Most people seem to like it. Yeah. But but this was a real treat. So thank you for having me on to relive that trauma.
Thank you.
Of course. So listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with Dressed to Kill? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm a Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe, and maybe throw some dollars with our wave on Patreon.
Yeah.
Please, that'd be great. Thank you to Eric Carr for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.